Border security is a priority for countries and their leaders, but at what cost to the environment? Poland has built a 186-kilometre fence along its border with Belarus to stop migrants. But it cuts through a UNESCO World Heritage Forest, and campaigners say it's causing significant trauma to wildlife. So, how damaging are these huge physical structures for species? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, more and more countries are building physical barriers along their borders to keep people out. Political leaders say they're critical to national security, but often little or no thought is given to the environmental impact. In some cases, no assessment has even been made of what potential damage could be done.
Built to keep people out and secure national borders, but these security measures are risking the livelihood of the local wildlife, disrupting their migration routes and habitats. On the Polish-Belarus border, a steel fence now slices through the Bialowieza Forest, one of Europe's last primeval woodlands. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but that's in danger of being lost.
The border of the Polish in the eastern side of Poland has been a big disaster for all wildlife because it has become a barrier movement. It will reduce the population of some of them because they cannot mix genetically with the others and has fragmented their habitat. Mainly it will affect wolf, lynx, bears, what they were also recolonizing from Belarus, but this border has stopped the process.
Along this road, scientists have found dead reptiles and bison hit by vehicles, while the barbed wire fences have injured animals. Border patrols and construction work have also led to an increase in invasive plants, changing the forest's ancient ecosystem. The United Nations Environment Assembly now lists the Bialowieza Forest as critical, meaning its ecosystem is at a high risk of collapsing. There are more than 60 physical border walls worldwide. On the US-Mexico border, there's over 1,000 kilometers of barriers. President Trump wants to stop illegal migration, but the wall is also blocking animals such as white-tailed deer, black bears and mountain lions, forcing them into smaller, often dangerous territories. Scientists warn that without connected habitats, wildlife could face decades of disruption and in some cases extinction. Governments say border control is essential for safety and sovereignty, but at what cost?
Well, let's meet our guests in Bialowieza village in Poland. I'm joined by Katarzyna Nowak. She's a scientist at the Mammal Research Institute. That's at the Polish Academy of Sciences. In Tucson, Arizona, we have Miles Traphagen. He is Borderlands Program Coordinator at Wildlands Network. And in Bonn, Germany, we have Tanya Rosen. Tanya is Director of the Central Asia Programs for Conservation X Labs. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Katarzyna, to you first of all, this incredible forest where you live, where you work and you study, just talk to us about its significance and what you're seeing with these border structures.
So Bialowieza Forest is the best preserved lowland temperate forest in Europe. It's the stronghold for European bison. We also have other megafauna such as moose, Eurasian lynx, and wolf. It's similar in size to one of your parks in England, the North York Moors National Park in North Yorkshire. And it has been a transboundary UNESCO or a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1979, and the Belarus side was added in 1992. And in its current state, it has been this size because it was extended since 2014. And
talk to me about the impact you're seeing, Katarzyna, of all of this change on the local wildlife.
So in 2022, the 5.5 meter high barrier was erected on Poland's side. And it's important to note that animals enjoyed free movement across Poland and Belarus until about 1981, when Belarus also had a much lower fence on its side in response to Poland's solidarity movement. So now we have a multiple barrier system, and this is important to point out because we now have animals such as European bison trapped in between Poland's 5.5 meter barrier and Belarus's 2.5 meter barrier. There are gates in Poland's barrier, but they remain closed. And UNESCO, in its mission report from last year, wrote that it would be very vital to restart transboundary dialogue cooperation, at least on the technical and scientific levels, to reduce the impacts of these border barriers. And lynx and moose are the primary species that will be affected by these barriers. They have very small populations on the Polish side, and they were, as of recently, part of a continuous cross-border population.
Thanks, Katarzyna. Miles, to you, how concerned are you about what you're seeing and hearing from all over the world, not just the Poland-Belarus border, but other countries as well?
I'm very concerned. We're walling off the world. Currently, there are border walls and fences on more than 80 countries around the globe, and they seem to be increasing with the rise of more authoritarian governments. And what we're seeing here in the United States is that we have over 1,000 kilometers of border walls here. And that term is actually official by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol now, border walls. It used to be called border barriers and fencing, but now they're actually using the word walls. The effect that we're going to see on global biodiversity and animal movements, I think, is going to be profound. And when you look at borders, they tend to be in places where there's a convergence of, either a changing ecotype or rivers or mountains. And so these places, sometimes they call, edge effects and ecotones. These are really prone to, a lot of, sensitive, dynamics. And so when we start putting up border barriers, border walls, in these places, I think that we're going to see a cascading effect of, evolutionary processes on animals and probably an overall reduction in abundance of wildlife and biodiversity.
Thanks, Miles. Tanya, to you, that phrase Miles just used there, we're walling off the world. This is very worrying, and it's not just happening in one or two countries, it's happening everywhere.
Yes, exactly. And it's extremely concerning because, where I live in Turkmenistan in Central Asia, this region is very well known for these ancient migrations of ungulates and migrations of large carnivores. Because of national security concerns, there is this increasing trend of, walling off countries and these barriers, these physical barriers that are set up for national security reasons are blocking these migrations and blocking wildlife from having access to water. And especially, this is of concern because of climate change and water resources diminishing. And on top of that, some of these species in Central Asia have experienced some severe declines. And because of this connectivity between populations being severed by border fences, we're witnessing local extinctions and the inability to reestablish local populations because of the presence of border fences.
Thank you, Tanya. Katarzyna, talk to me about just how old some of these forests are. We're dealing with ancient ecosystems that have been around longer than humans in some cases. I mean, are you worried about this modern kind of politics, fencing off and border security and very strict controls and big ugly structures being plonked in the middle of an ancient forest?
Yes, so it's estimated that in Bialowieza Forest, ecological processes have been ongoing for 12,000 years. So it's often referred to as a primeval forest, and it really is the best we have in Europe. It's important to note that these fences aren't your typical fence. They're usually fast tracked without environmental or social impact assessments. As I mentioned, they're high and they're long. They're often fortified with sharp elements, with floodlights. They're associated with patrol activities and other human activities. They are also often associated with other types of infrastructure, sometimes linear, like roads. Other times it might be outposts or watchtowers. Both Miles and Tanya can speak to this further, but the point is that these barriers, they displace wildlife, they restrict their movements, and they can also be deadly if animals become lodged or entangled. So indeed, I'm very worried.
Thanks, Katarzyna. Miles, your president, as we know, is a big fan of building walls on the border with Mexico. I see the United States has plans to build from the Pacific Ocean in California all the way to Rio Grande in Texas, another structure. What kind of impact will that have?
We are essentially walling off the continent, and I'm very concerned that we are altering the evolutionary history of the continent. Currently, there's about 1,000 kilometers of border walls on the US-Mexico border. And by the time they complete this, if they do, we're going to have 2,200 kilometers. And not only is that going to be a single fence, but it's going to be a double barrier. So we will, in essence, have a demilitarized zone between these two border walls, which are each about 10 meters high, with a zone between them ranging from 20 to 60 meters wide, and high intensity lighting. Currently, they're stringing razor wire, concertina wire, it's also known as. The ability for wildlife to move between the two countries in north and south along the continent is really going to be affected. And in this part of North America, Arizona, New Mexico, California, contains some of the highest biodiversity on the continent. It's been a migration corridor for eons. The north-south migrations are similar to in Europe. Eastern-western migrations, like in the Bialowieza Forest, are crucial for connectivity on a continental-wide basis. So in a changing climate where drought events are more frequent, wildfires, and animals need more space, not less, we're actually providing them fewer options. So it's an uncontrolled experiment that I think we're not going to see good outcomes from.
Tanya, do you worry that these policies are very popular when politicians and what so-called self-styled strong leaders say that they're doing this for protection, for security, to keep migrants out? Do you worry that those policies have a huge environmental cost that the political leaders really don't care about?
I think it's more nuanced and complicated than that, because some of the concerns, national security concerns, can be viewed as legitimate, and it also has to be highlighted that some countries that put these borders, they oftentimes they actually consult with environmental ministries, and there have been like situations where when the people in the environmental ministries were consulted, they actually didn't see a problem with these border fences, and there was like a missed opportunity to address this issue. And what we see is that currently most of the environmental ministries and bodies in Central Asia are very much concerned about these issues, and are trying to set up some form of interagency dialogue to see how these border fences can be modified in a way to allow some some measures to allow for some ecological connectivity for some of the most affected species.
Thank you. Katarzyna, I see in your country, in Poland, 3,000 guards and soldiers monitor that border with Belarus. And despite that level of security, there were 30,000 attempts to cross into your country last year. So clearly it's not working.
Clearly, there are tunnels being found, just like on the U.S.-Mexico border. Sometimes there are makeshift ladders that we also come across. So, indeed, the infrastructure is not stopping people. I think that it has encouraged traffickers. The routes are also much more arduous now, which is a risk to human life. But I'll try to end on a or go in the direction of a more hopeful note, referring to what Tanya mentioned, that there are solutions that can be had. Of course, a more humanitarian asylum process would be one of those, because then people would not be stuck in the forest or trying to navigate these barriers. Establishing corridors for people and for wildlife is another solution. Miles can speak to A4 size openings in the U.S.-Mexico border wall that allow animals like bobcat to cross. There's also the option of opening these established gates and monitoring them. There are options of opening up river valleys, also considering greener and more humanitarian lines of defense. So virtual fences, which actually Tanya has told me about, something called war wilding now, where you have a form of passive nature restoration as a form of greener defense. So there are solutions to be had, both on the humanitarian side and the wildlife side.
Miles, talk to me about how the American public feel, because your president bangs on and on about migration and security and making America safe again. How does it play out with the American public? Do they care about the environment?
You know, I think the American public does, but the border wall is basically out of sight, out of mind. And we talk about here in the borderlands that the farther one gets from the border, the less they know, but the stronger their feelings are about what's happening at the border. So in these remote locations, there's just not a lot of constituency. There's not a lot of large cities for the most part, outside of San Diego, El Paso, those places. And people receive a lot of their news that has, a lot of spin on it, and they don't really understand what the borderlands are, what these wild areas are like. They assume it's desert and sand dunes, when in reality, it goes from the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico. And there's 20 different biotic communities there, ranging from pine forests and grasslands and everything in between. So the American public is just not very educated about this. And as a result, we're also losing a lot of our protected lands. There are national parks and monuments and wildlife refuges all along the U.S.-Mexico border. And we are incrementally taking those out of the public domain for both people and wildlife.
Tanya, to you, do you worry about the lack of public consultation on this, that political leaders just steam straight ahead, put the project in place, secure the borders, but the general population aren't asked their opinion on this?
It's a tricky question, because obviously this is an issue of national security, and in many countries there isn't a process where the public is being consulted. However, now that the general public is becoming more and more aware of these issues, and the fact that many wildlife found in Turkmenistan, across Central Asia, rely on these migrations for their survival, there is increasing public interest, and then potentially public pressure to address this issue and resolve it. And what we have in our favor in Central Asia is that under the UN Convention on Migratory Species, there is so-called Central Asian Mammals Initiative, which is this incredible platform to bring together all of the countries from Central Asia to discuss the conservation status of a number of migratory species, and the issue of border fences and the impact on border fences on ecological connectivities of these animals is something that it's one of the priority topics. And already last year, we had a meeting in Ashgabat where all of the 5 Central Asian countries came, and there were not only representatives from the environmental agencies, but also from border security agencies. And it was a very, very interesting and productive dialogue that showed that, some solutions are readily available that can achieve the goal of maintaining the national security, but also restoring this migrations and ecological connectivity for animals.
Thanks, Tanya. Katarzyna, to you, we know the relationship between your country, Poland, and your neighbours in Belarus. That is quite a fragile, febrile relationship, very, very difficult right now. Do you worry that given the nature of that situation, you're not going to see demilitarization anytime soon?
It's a good question. There is some precedence for Poland and Belarus cooperating, including in Bialowieza Forest, the parks from either side, and some, let's say, golden years. And I think that there's prospect to again reinitiate some technical and scientific cooperation, including to untrap, allow out these animals that are in between both countries' barriers. There's also, and now maybe speaking somehow idealistically, there is this potential of, if not peace parks, then some sort of the peace passages or openings on a smaller scale. Peace parks exist all over the world. There are some 60 of them. Half of them are on the African continent. And those kinds of areas are then demilitarized. It's where wildlife movement could be restored. So there are entities like the Peace Parks Foundation or UNESCO or the IUCN that could act as a moderator or a facilitator of that dialogue between Poland and Belarus. So I'm not without hope. I think that where there's a will, there's a way, and it's possible to restore wildlife movement if both countries are willing to cooperate.
Miles, just spell out for me the species that you think are really struggling along your border with Mexico.
Well, there's a lot of diverse species here. We have black bears, and we also have the jaguar, which is the 3rd largest cat in the world. Those are the 2 of the most iconic species and the largest here, and they require large movements. And so they obviously cannot make it through border barriers. We published a paper last November looking at the effects of border walls and animal movement, and we looked at 20 species, and there was an 86% reduction in the ability for those to cross. And it's fairly, obvious, like a jackrabbit, a smaller cat like a bobcat or a lynx, they can make it through the narrower spaces, which are about 10 centimeters wide. But obviously deer and black bears and jaguars cannot make it through there. And just recently, we had another jaguar appear on trail cameras in southern Arizona. And so these animals are moving up from Mexico and recolonizing lands that they used to occupy. And, as time goes on and we increase these number of border barriers and wall off the continent entirely, I think that we're going to see profound changes in the distribution of wildlife along the U.S.-Mexico border.
Thank you, Miles. Tanya, to you, what must the wildlife think when they've been so used to roaming freely for centuries and man comes along and just dumps these horrible structures and borders, and these animals are really, really struggling?
It's a great source of panic for these animals. We see that especially with the ungulates, with the goiter gazelle and the ural sheep, because we've oftentimes found remains of gazelles and ural sheep on the border. Sometimes they might run into a fence because they're trying to escape. Oftentimes, poachers, or they get scared by the sound of vehicles and they run into fences, and they still think they can get through, but they can't, and then they just die in this very horrible and violent way. And then we see, Persian leopards who sometimes they manage to get across the fence, but nowadays fewer leopards cross, for example, from Iran to Turkmenistan, because unless there is a strong, motivating factor like the presence of water across the border, or the visual observation of some interesting prey, they get discouraged and they may not, cross the fence. And so all of that has impacts on the wildlife that we, for example, see in Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Katarzyna, to Miles in the United States and to Tanya in Germany. Thank you all so much. Fascinating stuff. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.